My moment of impact happened when I was in my senior year at Duke University. I was doing production services for the Duke Chapel, and at the end of a work shift, I went down to help put away some equipment, and in the dark underbelly of the Duke Chapel, I was introduced to the machine.
Today's impactful guest is Shea Pepper. Shea is an award-winning creative director, producer, strategist, and branding expert. Shea has demonstrated huge versatility in her career, which makes her the multi-hyphenate creative powerhouse she is today, working at the nexus of personalized creative storytelling, brand growth, while leveraging forward edge of technology and generative AI. She has held senior roles at fabled media brands, including senior writer and producer at A&E's Lifetime Television, creative services director at BBC America, where she actually built the department from the ground up, creative director and VP creative at NBC Universal SyFy Chiller, where she led creative concepting for Sharknado, The Magicians, Face Off, and other things. Now, let's just stay on Chiller for a second, because this was such a prolific chapter showcasing Shea's insane creative chops. She won 8 awards, including multiple Clio and Pro Max awards. I, like so many of you, prefer my tornadoes with sharks because, sharks happen. Sharknado is clearly one of the GOAT sci-fi film series. But my absolute favorite, which this episode cannot progress without me mentioning right now, is the one Shea won both a Pro Max Gold and a Clio Gold, which is entitled Save a Psycho. It runs as a PSA, public service announcement, with the amazing Robert Englund imploring you, please, please watch Chiller so you can save these psychos, in a perfect satire of the structure and heartstring pulls of PSAs, opening with soft piano music and ending with the call to action. Open your heart so they can open your arteries with a circular saw. Today, Shea has a very cool job. She is the Senior Director of Dynamic Content and Creative Services at the amazing SundaySky, where she helps clients use the proprietary platform to create endlessly personalized videos to spark the interest of each unique user. Truly segment of one brand building. Joining us from one of the world's best cities for breakthrough creatives like Shea, the wonderful Big Apple, New York City, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Shea Pepper to the pod.
Thank you, Katy. I am very honored to be here and talking with you today.
Awesome. Today we're going to focus on how Shea navigated creative disruptions, how she took advantage of each technology as it came along to leverage storytelling, how she fused her left and right brain hemispheres to see how the technical platform unleashed new creative possibilities. What I want to highlight and what I want you to think about as you listen to Shea talk is that through line is only possible because she embraced adaptation. So here's the thing. With generative AI, we have enormous power available to us at scale in our globally connected world. And we honestly don't even fully understand that yet. But what we do know is if you want to be in the game, be relevant now and in the future, you got to embrace your own adaptation. You got to harness your curiosity. You got to invest in your own learning and development. You got to upskill and reskill with AI and its applications, not just to your job function, but think about the entire enterprise. Because you know what? Those AI agents, they don't like to stay confined in their silos. They have a tendency to migrate across the entire enterprise, driving system-level repercussions from local actions. So as you listen to Shea today share about her creative disruptions, think about, how are you going to design your own? As always, we want to hear from you, so please comment on what resonated with you in this episode. Shea, what is your moment of impact?
Well, Katie, so my moment of impact happened when I was in my senior year at Duke University. During my part-time job, I was doing production services for the Duke Chapel. And at the end of a work shift, I went down to help put away some equipment. And in the dark underbelly of the Duke Chapel, I was introduced to the machine. And that was my moment of impact.
Whoa, way to create a cliffhanger. We can already see your creative chops real time. So take us into that dark, dank basement, and what did you see?
So yeah, like I said, I was had a job at the Duke Production Services. They on Sundays they would film their or broadcast rather their chapel services so that the community could partake and enjoy them. And as an aspiring sort of film student and media professional, as I was at that time, I got a part-time job working with that crew, a crew of 3, by the way. So it was a sort of a humble start. And we were, doing the filming and the camera work. So it was mostly like a production type of role. But then at the end, I said we were putting things away. We went down, and my supervisor said, "Hey, I want to show you this really cool thing that I've been working with now," and it was the Avid Media Composer. Which at the time was brand new to me. First time I'd ever seen one or heard of one, really. And once he kind of showed how it worked, and we can get into that, but it just blew my mind. And it took my sort of burgeoning interest in storytelling and editorial. That's where I was leaning to. It just locked me into that path, and I became super fascinated and just enthralled with this technology and how it could change the way that productions work.
I love it. A true transformational moment in your journey, which probably catalyzed the rest of your career. We're going to talk about Avid Media Composer in a second, but can you just take us through the old school video production techniques? We're both Duke University Blue Devils. We both worked at Cable 13. I stayed on the talent side. It sounds like you clearly were on the production side. So back in the day, how would one edit video before Media Composer?
Yeah, so, I started working with the campus television station. Now, in that time, there was, Duke, as you know, had a great student-run union, and all of they had a lot of different clubs and different ways that students could get involved with various activities. Won't go through detailing them all, but one was Freewater Films, which was the film crew, and then there was also this campus television station, Cable 13. Now, my interest up until then had been leaning towards like news production. Like I got involved with Cable 13 because I was interested in the news. And being a broadcast, maybe journalist, something like that. I was interested in the news and media in that way. And so I started working with Cable 13, and we would, as a reporter in their news show, it was taking a big, heavy video camera with a portable tape deck, out onto campus and filming and interviewing whatever it is you were doing for your story, filming things on your 3/4-inch tape, all right, and then taking it back to the bowels in the basement of the Cable 13 studio and editing them together. I mean, I'm going to say reel to reel, but basically deck to deck. So you would have 2 decks lined up next to each other or on top of each other, however your space is set up. And it's, the reason they call it linear editing is you literally play and it records to a third space and in and out, and you kind of just linearly put your story together. film, as you may know, you can splice and you can split film apart. You can put things in. That's a different editorial process. But that's where splicing, all that film terminology, you can splice and merge, you can tape things together. That was a very different kind of process, which wasn't as linear. The linear format with video means that as you go through the story, you basically have to kind of lay it down as it goes. You can't go back and add something into the beginning without completely overwriting everything you've done.
What was it like when you first took this Avid Media Composer through its paces there at the Duke Chapel?
Yeah, so I would say that I wasn't, I didn't know how to use it. So I wasn't necessarily hopping on and taking it for a spin in that particular moment. But I watched my supervisor show me how it works. And I think the thing that really was so fascinating was this idea that you could construct your story, move things around, play around with it. It reminded me of how when you're working on a screenplay or working on a plot, you have like your index cards and you can kind of like, oh, maybe this moment works better here. Maybe this moment works better there. So it was the thought that you could, build the story in a nonlinear fashion if you wanted to. And the way that it made visual effects and easier to do. And of course, that takes in leaps and bounds, makes huge strides over the coming years afterwards. But the way that it easily assembled stories and effects, and in a way that was a lot like a word process. Coming when I was at Duke is like was beginning to get familiar with computers, and the way that we were working with word processing or just other programs. It felt natural. It felt, like, oh, I understand how this works. And so I think it was dovetailing with that sort of learning of that skill set and realizing the efficiency and just the potential of how to rethink the way that I could assemble, media.
Absolutely. So, you're really a creative person. I think we're having you back in a season or two to talk about a screenplay you might be working on with those index cards. But I'm just curious. I think you grew up in Cali, California. Were you a film buff growing up? How did your creative chops show up as a young person? And maybe how did that inform your decision to study dramatic writing, film and video production at Duke?
Yeah, so I would say I was a little bit of I don't know if a late bloomer, but I didn't lock into that early on. In fact, when I first started at Duke, I was undecided. That wonderful undecided major. I hadn't really figured it all out exactly. It's a great way to be. But what I will say is that I grew up in Northern California in the late 70s, 80s, 90s sort of era. And, the things that defined, I think, that generation were video, Blockbuster video, all the video stores, then the growth of Blockbuster, just the movie-going culture. So, I was definitely a fan of I don't know if I was a buff, but I was a fan of movies, big entertainment. And yeah, I was interested in, as I mentioned, news and journalism and just how media, impacted our lives. I had an internship at a radio station when I was in high school, working with a news reporter. So, I definitely was on that kind of like news track for a while. And when I was at Duke, I also read the news at their radio station. So, I was kind of all into this journalism area and writing, and I worked at the paper. So I was definitely kind of on that road. And I started getting interested in film at Duke. There was a great film studies program, as you may remember there. I went to Duke had an exchange. I call it an exchange program. I say I studied abroad. I studied abroad in New York. So I came up to New York and had an internship at Good Morning America while studying there. So I was on this kind of television. It was a fascinating track for me. And, like I said, I was doing some modicum of it like on front of the camera, thinking maybe I'll be a reporter or a presenter or something like that. And then when I started working at Cable 13 and I began working with their editing equipment, as a producer there, you have to put the stories together yourself. And I just really loved the way that editing kind of was storytelling and creation, but also working with technology and working with the components that put it together. And there's that production piece of it that was very appealing to kind of my tactical, the sort of techie side of my brain, I guess, that left brain, right brain thing, right? Maybe. So I found that was very appealing in terms of like my expression. Like I can write, I can, construct the story, I can bring it to life in a way that felt organic, and like it felt like my ideas were at the root of it, right? Not just standing and reporting. So I kind of got involved really enthralled with the production piece of media. And I would say more video than film, because there of course was a great film club as well. I felt like video was just so much more immediate and so much more instant gratification, let's just say, I guess. Because film is it's such a labor of love. It takes a lot, and maybe I didn't have the patience when I was younger to kind of go through that process. But I liked video. It wasn't as cool as film at that time, I don't think, and so maybe it was a different process. But I just loved the kind of fast storytelling piece of it, and also its intersection with advertising and TV, and that was kind of where my interests were heading, and so it kind of grew out of that.
It's setting up the whole through line of this conversation beautifully. I was so excited to have you on because you're one of the rare people I know who is as engineering technically minded as you are breakthrough creative innovation minded. And I think your secret sauce is the fusion. It's the fusion of the two. And that's why I'm so tickled and honored to have you talking about creative disruptions, because you're the perfect person to talk about how the technology unleashed the creativity. So we have a lot to cover with your career, but I do want to go to really quickly, you're one of the OG members of Crew Cuts, which has since been renamed, but there's a lot of fabled people that work there. So you want to just give us a quick beat on starting, so you graduate Duke and you head to New York, and what happens at Crew Cuts?
Yeah, I graduated, and this flows directly out of that, machine in the basement, because after, being introduced to the Avid, I suddenly had focus and direction. And I began reaching out to people saying, I want to work on the Avid. I want to be, an editor, and I want to work on this piece of equipment. And I began networking with some Duke alums and ended up, getting introduced and looking at interviewing for jobs at a couple of different houses in New York. And I ended up at Crew Cuts, which was great. It was a real exciting time to be there. At the time, they had just moved to this big space. I think they had, I want to say, like 8 editors working there at the time, all working in advertising, mostly in advertising projects. So we had clients like BBD&O, Ogilvy and Mather, Chiat Day, all the kind of big agencies doing campaigns for Pepsi, Pizza Hut, Jaguar cars, all the kind of really cool stuff. And so it was an amazing time, and I learned so much. And I got exposure to, the entire post-production sort of process. They had their own sound studio at the time. They had just opened up a Flame production, graphics production arm. So it was really the beginning of seeing how these shops were opening up and handling kind of end-to-end production process. Well, in this case, post-production, but you know what I mean? It's like it ends up going further from there as time goes on. But like we were doing, the editorial through to the post-finish, through to the graphics production, and it was all happening and kind of being consolidated in one place.
Fascinating. I just want to highlight to people listening the power of serendipity. So the thing about serendipity is you got to be open to it. And so what I love about Shea's story is she happened to be involved in video production at Duke, and she happened to be there when the Avid media composer machine showed up in the basement. And then she was open to thinking about this career, and that launched her into this fascinating world with the tie-ins in marketing and advertising, which are very big themes in your career, which we're going to get into. So listeners, be aware of your gut instincts and be open to those serendipitous moments. So I want to set the stage for why young people listening should care about why media has evolved and what new technologies brought. And I think it's really important right now. I'm a creator myself, and I think we need an intergenerational global response to AI and how it's affecting creators of every stripe and in every country. So I think it makes sense for us to know what we have learned from prior creative disruptions. Shea and I are going to kind of walk you through a career retrospective, and we're going to shout out the technology evolutions as we go. Now, the first era is broadcast, which predates us because we are young. So in the 1950s through the 1980s, network broadcasting drove a monoculture of sorts where we all watch the same thing at the same time. But then we're going to have Shea talk to the second era, which is the cable and DVR era, 1990s to 2000s. Two big changes. Cable brought the proliferation of channels. You could watch what you wanted, when you wanted, no more appointment viewing. And you could fast forward through commercials, which started this current race for users' attention. So, Shea, during this era, you have two very significant leadership roles. You're the senior writer-producer of on-air promotions at Lifetime Television. You're the creative services director at BBC America, where you stood up the department from scratch. For each of these, can you share what you loved about this chapter and maybe talk a little bit about the technology and the creativity?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'll start with Lifetime. I mean, I was at Lifetime for about 8 years. And just to tie that into the historical journey through line that you mentioned. So I started at Lifetime in 97. And that was really when the cable sphere, universe of cable TV was kind of hitting its stride into the peak, right? As you said, it was this huge proliferation of cable channels. When I first started at Lifetime, it was just Lifetime. And then by the time I left there, we had Lifetime Movie Network, Lifetime Real Women, Lifetime. So and all of these other, these like satellite channels. We had tried a couple even. So what was happening at that time, and this isn't necessarily like marketing technology specifically that I was working with that like we were talking about, but this is more about like what was happening, big picture in the industry is these cable channels were starting to see some success. They were grabbing up bandwidth, as we called it, bandwidth on the cable bandwidth. They were able to get different, 5 more slots on the cable bandwidth so that they could launch niche branded networks, right? And control, hopefully, just grab more eyeballs. I think it was this play to like. The audience was fracturing, yes, but it was growing a lot. It was moving from broadcast network television to cable television, and everyone was just trying to grab eyeballs. And one of the ways to grab eyeballs was obviously to be able to focus, say, we want people who are interested in this particular type of programming. We're going to put it on 24/7, and people will come to us, right? Mm-hmm. So the cable kind of explosion was when all of these networks were trying to grow. They were trying to grow literally, outwardly by taking up more space, and to get more revenue, to get more eyeballs on their content. And so, yeah, it was the other major force that happened at that time, and Lifetime was kind of on the forefront of it, is that cable networks had figured out that they could produce original programming, right? previously it had been that many cable networks were just rerunning things that had come into syndication, right? Or there was a small market of made for TV stuff, but Lifetime kind of became a huge phenomenon at that moment because they started producing original content and had some big hits with their original content. And a lot of other cable networks looked at us and said, well, we can do that too. And so there was this, exponential increase in original programming on cable networks. I think to go back to what we were talking about with technology, I have to believe that the technological advances with things like the Avid, and I'm sure there were many other forces going on in Hollywood and in that, were not necessarily a part of the marketing deal structures, revenue streams, all of those things. But the end result was that people were producing a lot of content and it was finding homes on cable networks. So as a marketer, then the challenge becomes a couple of things. How do you get people to know about and watch your programming, and how do you cut through, and get your brand known? And so that's, I think, where you saw cable networks started to, branding as a thing became super. I mean, branding's always huge. I'm not trying to say we invented branding, but the challenge was, how do you come up with your unique brand that you can then go out there and sell to somebody, sell to a viewer. That's where you get Lifetime Movie Network. That's where you get Lifetime Television Foreman. That's where you get BBC America. That's where you get Chiller. That's where you get all of these niche channels, because the hope was we're going to corner the market on this genre. We're going to corner the market on this type of viewer. So that was the big revolution at that time in cable television from my perspective.
Fascinating. Is there anything else you want to say about the BBC America experience?
What I did at Lifetime, that was a great creative era because we were really producing, just a lot of volumes of content to get out there and produce these shows. And we were really diving into how do we make this a very woman-centric, network, or, really kind of getting into how do we speak directly to our potential viewers and make this content as appealing as possible, these shows, initiatives, whatever. And that's where I really got a love for branded storytelling, because you're just kind of like, it's that challenge of like, how do I make this particular thing the best thing possible and speak directly to somebody, and appeal, engage them, encourage them to give up some of their time to watch, right? So that was what was really special about my Lifetime era. After being there for a while, I got the chance to go to BBC America. Now, the first appeal at BBC America was I was an Anglophile. I just loved all things British and British entertainment. And so the chance to kind of go focus on that, like that's the niche that I got to play in for a while. It was super, super fun. And yeah, like I said, they were building their network. The network existed, but they were at the point peeling away from Discovery. At the time, they were owned by Discovery. And again, this is the beginning of that era where properties and networks just started like shuffling around and changing hands, right? So Discovery had a hold on BBC America, and it peeled away. BBC Worldwide wanted to have it stand on its own, more on its own, I think, than it was. So they peeled it off. They wanted to play with all the other big cable networks in that space at the time, and so they were trying to get it to stand up on its feet and be its own. And have I learned a lot at BBC America about different business revenue models in broadcast media, because the goal for BBC America was to generate revenue for the BBC. They can't do that inside England because it's a public company. They have to use their company BBC Worldwide outside of their territory to try to make money, right? So diving into that business model was kind of fun. And the challenge there was, how do we establish, take that brand and make it known and establish it in the U.S. And kind of make people fall in love with it, I guess, just as much as we all did, and kind of mainstream it, right? So we had a lot of different properties that were varying from classic, to new, and just kind of bringing those across the pond and getting them out to the U.S. Again, they were building their department from the ground up. So at that point, many departments like BBC America, which were new, were starting to leverage the fact that this whole, like when I was working at Lifetime, it was the Avid media technology, but at BBC, it was the rise of Final Cut and sort of a more, I want to say, democratized, cheaper, a lower point of entry technology that was doing the same thing, practically the same thing, but was more affordable so that people could, more users could engage with it. I mean, the Avid Media Composer system was very expensive, very hard to maintain, and a lot of places stick with it. Obviously, once you build the infrastructure, it's hard to get rid of. But, for a new company, a new startup or entity, which didn't have that infrastructure, they had a little more leeway to kind of figure out what their path forward was. And some of the less expensive, more mainstream, more consumer technologies were winning out. And so when I was at BBC America, we built that department using Final Cut and Pro Tools and these sort of more consumer-facing technologies. Same output, same product came out on the other side, but the operating costs of our department were far lower, so they were able to build that.
I'm so glad you shared all of that, and that kind of shows your CEO mindset and your innovation. And I love the points that you made about Final Cut and increasing accessibility even to end users outside of studios. So now we're at the streaming revolution. The 2010s, Netflix and Hulu come in, popularized on-demand viewing, binge watching, and power shifts away from traditional studios to tech companies because now they can track consumer habits and dictate programming based on data-driven insights. During this era, you're at NBC Universal SyFy Chiller. You're the creative director of marketing and the VP creative in the marketing department. I already talked about your awards. What would you like to highlight about this chapter and what the technology was supporting or limited by?
Yeah, so I think the hallmark of this chapter is, we talked about how cable proliferated into fractured audiences and, lots of channels. And at a company like NBC, which is a huge, obviously a big major player in that space, and they have not only a lot of their own cable networks, but also the broadcast parent company as well. The forces that we felt a lot in that universe was the audience was fracturing. Ratings were going down overall. And you would see a lot of like spikes, standing at big tentpole events was a major thing. And the getting revenue was always the goal, obviously, right? Viewers and revenue. So as the audience is fractured, and ratings would dip over time, and they would the viewers would spread out. The challenge was, how do you continue to make money, with that, with if your ratings are declining. One of the ways that marketing teams could help with that was pursuing more partnerships and sponsors in marketing content, right? So I actually, while I was at NBC and SyFy and Chiller, had the opportunity to be a part of the partnerships sales team, right? So I was still a creative, but the sales teams would, go out and pursue partnerships, co-branded partnerships with companies. So you mentioned Sharknado. Let's take Sharknado as an example. There was a big tentpole event, and NBC, one of the ways that they would leverage that franchise was not only with ratings, but also how do you extend the franchise to bring revenue into because of its property as an IP and as a marketing or as a content entity. So we would go, I mean, you've seen all these things. Now I think it's a lot more standards. Like, you'll see a kind of a co-branded, entertaining little piece, a snippet. Now they probably call them verts now, right? Like that's what those are. That is meant to be, a revenue share. You sell that content to a partner, and so it brings in revenue. And we being the network, the cable company, would take on the production costs, right? And so we don't have to get into like the deal structure there, because I'm sure I don't want to speak up beyond my depth there. But the point is that we were utilizing that as a revenue stream to continue to bring, to boost up the properties. Sorry, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I love how you're highlighting the evolution of marketing and advertising as we go. So let's go to the current era, which most people call the age of personalization. It's so wonderful to have you today, because at SundaySky, this is your world. And now we have social and creator platforms like YouTube that function like TV. We're very algorithmic driven, AI driven, affecting everything from the user interface to dynamic thumbnails to adaptive storytelling. So in your current role with SundaySky as Senior Director of Dynamic Content and Creative Services, you've been there for almost a decade in various roles. And SundaySky is the #1 enterprise video personalization platform. Quote, from customer experience and onboarding to marketing and sales, SundaySky's all-in-one AI-enriched platform makes it easy for anyone to do more with video. So Shea, can we start with some of the basics? What does personalization of video really mean?
Well, I think it means what it sounds like, in that our technology and our platform is able to take data signals and incorporate them into a video asset in real time, right? So, and then there's another piece of it, if we're talking about paid media, in which we can then also target a viewer based on data signals that we're finding, out in the ether, right? In the programmatic space. So, from a video asset perspective, what I do is create a story, right, around, we could kind of call them use cases or a programmatic ad. And we have a structure, but then we figure out what are the data inputs that we're going to be able to pull into this story, and how will that change the story, either by showing us different visual, triggering a different narration piece, pulling in, like I said, live in real time, a piece of data that is specific to you. So personalizing a video asset in this space is really just what it sounds like, where we are personalizing it. And the kind of amazing part and the technology part is that it's really just to one person. It's not a one-to-many story like a traditional advertisement. It's a very personalized story, and we can do that on a contextual level, on a demographic level, right all the way down to a very personal one-to-one level.
It is so fascinating. And when we had our prep call, you blew my mind when you first described to me, I guess the marketing and advertising term for this is dynamic creative. And it's really amazing. So what are the benefits of this dynamic creative process?
For brands and for advertisers, the benefit is that you can deliver a relevant ad or a relevant piece of content to your viewer. I mean, look, this is the reason why any advertising is successful, right? Because you are trying to find affinities, right, with your viewer and your audience. Traditional ads and they're shooting broad, big groups. But with personalization, what becomes possible is to really be very specific to a viewer, which the benefits of that are increasing engagement with the content. So somebody watches it all the way through. They actually watch it. They don't get bored right away. And also it encourages actual action. Like, this is what everybody wants. They want the click through. They want the purchase. They want, the action taken, the instructions followed. So it's really, personalization is a tool to increase engagement and increase follow through and action.
Amazing. Marketers work on dynamic creative optimization. And maybe you can give us an example of an ad campaign where you're taking these 3 building blocks you told us about: data, content, and strategy. Can you talk a little bit about how dynamic content optimization works, and then maybe give us an example?
Yeah. So, the optimization piece is really just optimizing a piece of creative so that it performs better. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. One thing that we can do with our technology and algorithm is try to, we measure, right? So we're saying the end action is measurable, right? A click through is measurable, or how much of it they watched is measurable. So we use those measurements to then dictate the next action. If we're getting more success, more clicks, more views, more time spent with the asset, then we know this is working, and we can teach the algorithms to increase serving that particular piece of creative to a particular person that looks like this. So we're seeing the propensity. If the propensity is working, then we serve it up more, right? So it's a pretty straightforward, like, if it's working, keep going with it, lean into it, right? If it's working, lean into it. But that's all predicated on the fact that these are measurable results and outcomes, and learning and teaching, learning from those outcomes and teaching an algorithm or a technology to kind of push it further.
I'm wondering if you want to go to the end dimension, the Z space. I think you have the creative engineering fusion to be able to take us there. Please, Twilight Zone us to the Z space. What is it?
Well, the Z space is sort of how I try to explain what dynamic personalization is in terms of storytelling. So, if we just think back to how we started this conversation. If a story is linear, it goes from point A, to point B, right? The story arc, right, goes through its cycle. And when I build one story, I build it in a fashion, and I'm telling that one story. With the technology, dynamic creative that I can build now, I can have a baseline story, but then it's sort of like a choose your own adventure, right?
Yeah.
So every piece of that story has, I think of it visually, I'm sorry, because to me in my head, it looks like it's like the timeline. It's like the timeline on the system that I'm working on, right? So my timeline has scenes that moves, from beginning to end, but then think of embedded within those scenes, there are stacked up like Legos, right? A Lego stack of different options. So, you can start a story, and then based on a data input, it can go to this piece. And then based on the next data input, it goes down to, a demographic information. So maybe we can break it down in that way. But every piece of data that comes into this ecosystem of my story can trigger something different, and they can combine and trigger something different. So it's having not just one linear story, but this choose your own adventure of, your data comes in, which means you go turn to page 47 instead of page 33, so it's that structure of my story that's what makes it personalized. My story is not like anyone else's story.
Yeah, I love that. So let's take the example we're selling a car. And so you're creating this creative library with this different stacked images at this point in the story based on the data that the system is getting from the user. So you may have a guy that wants adventure. He wants to go rugged terrain. He wants to go four-wheeling, or a gal, or a they. That's the user story. Those are the user attributes. And then over here, maybe I'm going to flip the conventional gender now in this story. You have a very cautious first-time parent that wants the airbags and the very safe steel frame and the excellent data on crash safety. So tell me about how this journey kind of plays out.
Yeah, so you've lined up two really great personas. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, but basically we would look, so let's say we have this ad, right? There are a couple of things. There's the targeting. How do we find that persona that you're talking about? So there are two pieces to it. Finding the person, and then using those data signals, the same data signals that help you find a person, then can inform the story. So if I have, my, let's call it outdoor lover, versus family, big family,
Yep.
I would have those options, basically like I have a story that says, basically like the menu of the story, right? So when a video gets played in our technology, the minute somebody clicks on a view, the video begins to render in real time. And all of the data inputs that come in at that time are directing logic to tell the algorithm what to show. So if I get a signal that says this is a 40-something, family-oriented, outdoor lover, then all of those decisions go into my decision matrix, and it triggers the different messages that would appeal to that person. So I may have a value prop scene. I may have an opening scene, right, in my story that I've said, okay, we know we're going to have one of these options, either a family person, an outdoor lover, a video game lover, or an animal lover. I can try to find all of those different things, and I can have a different opening visual, narration, message. All of the different creative elements that go into that experience can have alternate options that would be targeted to that person. So that can be, depending on what data signals come in, somebody's going to get either, sitting at home on their couch with a cat by their side versus out in the woods, chopping trees. I don't know what they're fishing.
Right.
So that would, alter the story.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and there is no constraint, right? It's endlessly. You really are talking about targeting an individual viewer.
Yeah, the only constraint really is, how much data can we get on somebody, and there could be some constraints around like how big how much production we want to put into it, but it is endless variations. But a lot of that comes in through like the ability to say we can also pull in very specific information from feeds, but that's more in like a pay owned media space rather than a paid media space, because we don't have that kind of data on you out in the wild.
How does privacy fit into this? I don't know if this is a consideration that you build into your platform, but can you speak a little bit on this topic? I know kind of Europe's ahead of the U.S. on this, but you're working with global clients, and can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we work with very highly regulated industries. Not so much on the paid media side. That's different, but the other sort of branch of the company works on what we call CRM, customer relationship management, company initiatives. And one of the examples, the easiest way sometimes for me to explain what our company does is a personalized video bill or personalized explanation of benefits for your doctor, your healthcare. So yeah, we work with some big healthcare companies, and they want to keep their customers informed, engaged, happy with their plans, and they'll send an explanation of benefits about your last doctor visit. And so that's a situation where we are pulling in, very specific information about a viewer. And those are highly regulated fields, and privacy and data concerns are a huge part of what we try to control and ensure. And so there are a couple of advantages to our particular technology. One, as I mentioned before, we render in real time. So what that means is the data is never stored anywhere, right? It's pulled in sort of at the moment of request. The story is used, or the data is used to create the story in real time, and then it disappears and it's never to be found again. And in fact, part of the technology is if you took an action that was requested in the video, for example, if you paid your bill, we send you a video to say, here's a recap and an explanation of your bill. At the end of the video, click here to pay now. You click, you pay the bill. If you relog in and watch that video, the minute after you do it, you're going to get a video that says, thanks for paying your bill. So the data is happening in real time. The story is adjusting in real time, and it's not saved anywhere. It's never stored anywhere. So that's an example of one of the ways that privacy, the technology that we use at least is controlling for privacy. And there are other ways. I mean, I'm not a security professional at my company, but there are definitely other ways that we have to be compliant with, privacy and that sort of thing in that space. From a paid media perspective, and paid media meaning just like programmatic CTV, those spaces, not you get an email that sends you to a landing page with a video on it. We don't have that kind of direct data coming in from our viewers, but it's more about finding data from third-party customers or integrating with whatever first-party data the brand that we're working with is able to provide, which usually is just like, are you a loyalty member or not? We're talking about like, I know where you live.
Right.
We're talking about things that a brand would know about you.
Yeah. So I wonder if we can go to agentic AI for a second. So SundaySky's platform is AI enriched. It's been that way for a long time. You guys were OG in the AI space. When you were talking about like selling the car to the outdoor dog lover, I was picturing, the AI could show a picture of me with my 5 leashes holding black Labradors, trying to get them into my van or something. So how are you using agentic AI?
So right now, it's been an interesting journey at SundaySky over, really since I got there. When we've evolved our technology from sort of managed service platform into now it's in current iteration. A lot of it is a self-service platform. So our customers and clients are working in it directly for the CRM side at least, and so our journey with AI is more about how do we leverage it as a tool, like many companies are leveraging it as tools to, make our product better, to increase efficiency and, build faster, better, product, creative product. So, we have generators, AI media generators that can help people create images. They can help people. We have AI voices that are part of that can create narration. So a lot of the creative tools that are really being leveraged by a lot of companies are baked into our platform as well. And going back to the discussion about security, privacy, all of those things. I mean, we definitely take pains and build things in a way that it's safe and secure. For example, we have a part of our platform is a partnership and an integration with Getty Images, so that if you're working in our platform, you're not bringing footage that you shot. You can find stock footage, and it's part of the experience. We also have an AI image generator or something that can create imagery. You can't turn still images into moving footage, right? But you can't do that with the stock footage because that would be a violation of the contract. So we're very cognizant and work within the the parameters of what's allowed behavior. So then that's been an interesting learning experience around the integration of AI into the tools. It's like you still have to, follow the rules, right?
Yeah, you got to keep the human in the loop.
Yeah.
So my last question before we go to our closing question is, what do you love about your job at SundaySky? What lights you up?
Well, I love the creation process. I mean, that's been something that's really fun. I mean, as you've heard throughout my career, I've gone from kind of being a creator to a people manager, and right now I'm at this kind of intersection where, not surprisingly, as a kind of a smaller company, I get to do a lot of things, and creation is part of it, but also big picture thinking around like how do we build systems to connect ourselves with agencies and allow us to, onboard and make new kinds of partnerships and new directions as our technology evolves. So seeing the evolution of how, a product company kind of builds itself in real time. We're like on the highway going 60 miles an hour trying to build the car as we go. And it's a very different experience from being, like at a big legacy media institution, which is also great. But it's been fun to be on this side and in that really dynamic environment. And just, there's a lot more play that can happen in that space.
I love it. Okay, our final question, which we always close with. Shea, what brings you hope?
The reason why answering this is hard for me is I always find it a little challenging to feel like I can read the tea leaves appropriately, right? Hope is, I think when I think about hope, I want to, I'm looking for that end result. But I was thinking that, the thing that makes me hopeful and I guess brings joy is that idea of, we can make an impact at any point in our lives, right? I think when I was young and I was like, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, this is my path, but my path has gone all over the place. And, I hear, I listen to people, and on podcasts and, I listen to experts, and people are learning and growing and changing and have these just dynamic lives. And I guess that's what gives me hope, is that things are dynamic and ever evolving. And, it's an adventure.
It's an adventure coming from an expert in personalized, choose your own adventure. And I love how you kind of brought it home to the through line of adaptation, which also is a projection forward, right? And what I think so remarkable about you, Shea, is, you're so open, you're so curious, and you're aware of those serendipitous moments. And you have this fascinating career where you've done everything from sort of being a CEO, standing up an entirely new department, to being a major creative ideator and leading teams. She even came up with the phrase, there's no I in diva. Did I get that right? I could have gone through your creative resume the whole time, but then we never would have spoken. And just everything that you're doing right now on the very cutting edge of helping major brands globally do personalized storytelling and usher in the era of segment of one marketing. It's really fascinating. You're such a dynamic, creative voice, and I'm so honored to have spoken with you today on the pod. Shea Pepper of SundaySky.
Thank you so much, Katy. It was so much fun to talk to you, and I love what you're doing here, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for shouting out impact. Shea said it. You can always make your impact now. So be open to your creative possibilities and go for it. Thank you, Shea.
Thank you.